Hello and welcome to the Dev Jam Band Podcast. My name's Sean and joining me as always is the one and only Dante from Mr. Document. And how are we?
I'm so good, Sean. We've got a bloody trade to announce, don't we, this week?
That's not the tune. I've missed it a little bit. We've got two trades to announce, maybe three.
Maybe three.
Yeah.
Well, we're burying the lead a little bit here.
The third is of course that Keon Johnson might be rerouted to a fourth team.
Oh my goodness.
This was big enough. I don't think we've had one of these in a while, but this was big enough for you to message me and say, "Hey, we're recording a podcast at the next available slot, which happens to be this Monday." And you were like, "All right, do what you can. We're getting on a microphone to talk about this because this is, and rightfully huge." What were your initial thoughts, or should we go through the particulars, or just can you tell me your knee-jerk reaction when you saw this news?
Let's particulars first, and then I'll tell you.
All right, off you
go. So the first of the two trades is the big one, the Dame trade. So Damian Lillard has been traded to the Bucks. The Blazers have received Jrue Holiday, DeAndre Ayton, Tumani Kamara, a 2029 unprotected first from the Bucks, and then 28 and 30 pick swaps. And the third team, the Phoenix Suns, wiggled their way in there, have received Yusuf Nurkic, Grayson Allen, Nas Little, and the aforementioned Keon Johnson, who pretty much everyone in the league can't wait to get their hands on him. And then the second trade, which, it's a very fluid situation. And obviously, the Blazers are at the center of all of this. So some of this discussion will involve talking about the trades separately, but some of it will involve talking about them as a combined entity. So the Jrue trade, obviously Jrue was traded to the Blazers from the Bucks. They flipped him to the Boston Celtics for Rob Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, and then a Golden State top 4 protected 2024 pick. That's this upcoming draft, and then unprotected 2029 first from Boston. So heaps of stuff there, and the Blazers have ended up with literally loads.
It's like a 2K trade. It's incredible.
I think this happened on Thursday morning. So late last week, and I just didn't sleep very well, which is unusual for me because usually I'm lights out and then I'll see you at 7 a.m. But I was awake at 4:30 for some reason. I just woke up, couldn't get back to sleep, checked my phone, and I was kind of there for it as the news broke. So I was getting all these Bleacher Report notifications. I was getting an NBA notification. And my first reaction was awesome. Awesome. Because the Bucks weren't really a destination that was talked about very much. Obviously, Dame requested a trade to Miami. Miami were known to have some level of interest, and it just seemed for most of the offseason, it seemed like a fait accompli. But it turned out to be like somewhat of a dark horse. Real G's move in silence, and the Bucks have just kind of like, with no warning swooped in and almost it feels like stolen Dame from an Eastern Conference rival. And I can't think of two players who fit better together on a basketball court than Giannis and Dame. That is just going to be such a fun combination. So that was my first thought was like, yeah, awesome. Because obviously the headline, Dame is the headline there. What were you thinking when you first saw the news?
So I was fast asleep at 4:30 a.m. And the way the Bleacher Report notifications come, by the way, you mentioned an NBA notification, which is just disgusting. I think I got rid of them years ago. There is nothing good coming from them. But Bleacher Report notification. Actually, I'll give you a chance to rebut. Why do you still have the NBA app notifications?
Now that you've mentioned it, there's no good reason because you're right in saying that nothing good comes from there, and actually quite a lot bad comes from there. And I've almost like mentally stripped back my agency in receiving notifications from them, such that I forgot that I had any. And first thing that I'm going to do when we get off this call, I'm going to go and turn my notifications off from the NBA app.
It's adds nothing, always late. But the way the Bleacher Report notification is stacked is obviously the most recent one comes to the top. So I woke up, checked my phone, and the most recent notification was DeAndre Ayton excited for his new start in Portland, and my brain's just like, please don't tell me they doubled down on Dame. Please tell me they sold him and they somehow got DeAndre Ayton. So my first experience was, shit, this could be horrible, and then I was like, oh, thank goodness it's not horrible at all. Oh, would you look at that? I didn't take a pissy little package of Tyler Hero and some picks from an excellent organization. I love the fit. The fit is incredible. Like Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo. That is, it wasn't even on my radar, but it is so fun. Like for the Bucks to have a guard who can create their own shot off the dribble, for the first time since Brandon Jennings, seemingly, it's going to be so exciting. And obviously everyone's going back, deep in the archives and looking at some old tweets and the All-Star draft, which is, I think this is just justifying the fact that the All-Star draft being televised is great, because there was that one year where Giannis had the first pick drafting against LeBron, and he picks Damian Lillard and was like, oh, I need Dame Time on my team. And it's very cringe. But now looking back on it, it's like, oh, look at that. That's cool. But just incredible basketball fit. And I saw a tweet that was like, the first time Damian Lillard gets taken advantage of, and an offensive player just runs circles around him. But then all of a sudden, Brook Lopez is there. He's playing vertical, and then Giannis comes over and swats the ball. They're like, as soon as that happens, Damian Lillard's just going to fall to his knees and cry, because he's never seen that on a basketball court for his own team before. So love the fit for everyone involved. I think it's excellent. That's my knee-jerk reaction. And then I obviously had a very long kick reaction that we recorded and posted on this podcast network. But where do you want to start, Dante?
Well, I think let's start with the Bucks, and I think obviously Dame being the biggest player in this trade, kind of cements Milwaukee as the contender that they have been for the last few seasons. He is someone who, like we've mentioned, is going to be a great fit, but I think sort of once the dust had settled and I've kind of like, I had kind of like sifted through the players and all of the picks, I think the takeaway that I had immediately after that was that this couldn't be a stronger signal from the Bucks to Giannis, who's been making very loud, very consistent noise about not extending his contract if he doesn't feel like the team is the roster is in a position to win, and the organization is committed to continuing to build a roster that's ready to win. And he's got this year and then next year on his deal. So there was a very real scenario where if Giannis wasn't happy or the team underwhelmed this year with, an aging trio around him, the other two being Middleton and Lopez, who I think are 33 and 35 respectively, both with some injury history over the last few seasons. If this team didn't get it done or didn't come very, very close, you're looking at an unhappy Giannis on an expiring who's told you that he's not re-signing. So that would be like pretty much a doomsday scenario. So not only does this, I think, drastically increase the Bucks' title odds for this year and their ceiling as a championship contender, but also should do wonders in terms of satiating Giannis and saying, like, not only are we going to put a product on the floor that you can win with, but we're also ready to do whatever it takes to get you the best players in the league alongside you. And like, there's no kind of bigger fish that's been available over the last few years than Dame. And obviously this has been a long time coming. Like, we've kind of seen the writing on the wall for this for quite some time, and then the trade request itself dragged out. But this is just a huge get for the Bucks, who are trying to invigorate Giannis and make him excited about winning with this team. It's hard to see him leaving now that there's another bona fide top 10 player playing on his team.
And Giannis has already done this, and like, fair credit to him. Like, you talk about player loyalty and stuff, but he's been a guy has said to the front office, I want to stay here, but he's also not just going to settle in. He's not going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to stay here. So, let's just hope for the best. Arguably what Damian Lillard had done in the past couple of years. Giannis has said, and he's used his contractual status to sort of force the issue. And that happened when they made the trade for Jrue Holiday all those years ago. And now it's happened again when they made the trade for Damian Lillard. And it's, look, it's working. And Giannis could full well retire a buck and have 2+ titles. And it's like, okay, what a very successful career, multi-time MVP, multi-time NBA champion. And no one's going to be like, oh, well, Giannis was sending like some, no one's going to complain that Giannis was sending a couple of like cheeky side eyes at the front office saying you better hurry up and do something, because he did. It was deserved. You definitely don't want this front office to be like, okay, well, we've won one title. If we do nothing for the rest of our lives, that's fine. He's used his power to make the team around him better, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Milwaukee Bucks win a title in the next 2 years. In fact, after thinking about it for a week, I think they will be my favorites heading into next season. And yeah, I just think it's a win-win-win for all parties not named the Miami Heat.
Yeah, Miami is an interesting one, which maybe we can touch on a little bit later. But I mean, depending on your philosophical school of thought, it does seem like they may have really fumbled the bag here. But let's talk about the Blazers side of things first. So coming out of the 2 trades, they've come out with Ayton and Williams, so a pair of like,
good
depending
picks.
again on your philosophical school of thought, a pair of big men loaded with potential, or in Aiden's case, a big contract for who knows what. And then they've got 3 essentially unprotected first-round picks because Golden State's is so lightly protected, and then 2 pick swaps from Milwaukee in a period of time where Giannis might be gone or old or whatever, plus a recent first-round pick into Money Camara, and then Malcolm Brogdon, who could either just be your third guard and you just bring him off the bench behind Simons and Scoot Henderson, or someone who you can again flip and do the OKC move that Sam Presti perfected, and just get assets coming and get assets going. So I mean, you're right in saying that this is a way, way, way bigger haul than what they could have got from Miami and what was being talked about from Miami. And now they're in a position to, I guess, really just commit to seeing what this team looks like with Scoot at the wheel. They've still got some quality role players around him. They've still got Simons. Rob Williams is a really interesting piece. But I'm sort of really interested in the Ayton side of things, particularly how he's going to fit with Rob Williams, because they don't strike me as players that really would amplify each other's skill sets necessarily.
No, not at all. And obviously talking in the group chat today, Lucas Petridis, friend of the program / part of the program, said that he would be really interested to see what they can do with the zone with DeAndre Ayton and Robert Williams. And Chauncey Billups has experimented with the zone since he's come into the NBA as a head coach, and it's really nice and handy having Jeremy Grant as your point of attack defender. And I will wait and see what happens with those 2 bigs. But I also just want to see which DeAndre Ayton the Portland Trailblazers are going to get. Are they going to get the one that's really invigorated and, he spent a year with Chris Paul and Chris Paul's just like, hey, pull your fucking head in and dunk the ball? Or are they going to get the Ayton that's just lackadaisical, doesn't really want to do much, doesn't really want to commit on defense? And on offense, knowing how he has been in the past, I'm sure he could easily look around and say, well, I'm the most veteran guy on the court right now. What's he going to do? Give the ball to Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson, when in the past he's been playing with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, and he's been more than happy to put his head down and shoot like a fading post shot. But you would hope, it's the season hasn't started yet. We haven't seen him fail. I'm going to assume that he's going to do, he's going to do the positive thing and he's going to do the right thing. That's nice to get a 25-year-old big man that you can look at him as the front office, Toxic Joe Cronin can look at him and say, hey, we've got the center position locked down for the next 10 years with DeAndre Ayton, hopefully, just being a consistent presence next to our young guards coming up. But I would have to say I don't think that's going to be the case. And I think Robert Williams is much better than I think the general consensus has been in the past 24 hours, because everyone's saying, "Oh, Rob Williams, good pickup." Everyone by listening to different podcasts and looking at Twitter, but Rob Williams was the scariest thing as a Golden State fan in those finals. Rob Williams was just petrifying. I was scared for every player, maybe not Steph Curry, but every player going into the paint. You've just got this giant, towering Time Lord center. And now is the idea that he's going to come off the bench behind DeAndre Ayton when Rob will, if all's going well and if he's healthy, I would say he's like consistently in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation. Problem is he's been healthy 1 year out of the past 7 or whatever it is. So who knows what they're going to do there? But I think he's at least worth a good first round pick to a team that's like wanting to bring in the final defensive linchpin. And just before I ask your questions on the two bigs, Malcolm Brogdon would be a lovely pickup for 2 second-round picks for the LA Clippers just in a couple of days or even in a couple of weeks. But what are your thoughts on all the guys that they've brought in?
I think Lucas's idea of them playing a zone is really interesting because I can see how that would sort of allow them both to share space pretty effectively. But if you're rolling them out in a traditional man, I just think defensively that's really, really bad. Because whoever's playing on the 4, like you just put, a small ball 4 or a 4 who can shoot on either of those guys, and it's like all of a sudden, you've got problems. Rob Will's obviously a heaps better defender than Ayton, but Ayton, whilst being mobile enough on guard switches and out on the perimeter, is he can hold his own, but he's not sort of one of the newfangled bigs that's able to really kind of stay out there and compete. And I guess as a rim protector, he's kind of the same. He can hold his own. He's genuinely huge, so he can impact everything just by being there. But he, you kind of alluded to it. He phases in and out, of games and of stretches of the season and of seasons altogether, like we saw last year. So I'm skeptical at best of the defensive fit, and I actually think the offensive fit is even worse because neither of them are good enough shooters where they can sort of play on the court offensively together. Ayton is pretty accurate from mid-range, but again, you alluded to it before. That's actually, maybe a problem because he's both he's willing as well, and I think there is a real risk of him looking around and saying, oh, like a rookie point guard, oh, like a guy who's not that good in a Simons or a Sharp or whatever. Like I'm gonna do my thing. I'm gonna average 20 and 12. I'm gonna try and make the All-Star team. And I do think he could do that because I do think that there's a level to his game offensively that he hasn't had the freedom to hit. I just don't necessarily know that him having the freedom to hit that translates to winning basketball. And I think the fact that we saw him 2 seasons ago with the Suns where Monty Williams and Chris Paul and Devin Booker were just on him saying like defend and rim roll, he just he put up the most efficient 18 points you can possibly do. And he was playing genuinely good D. And the team almost won a championship. So that's, I think, the recipe, but I think you'd be bloody hard pressed to ever get him to commit to doing that again. Because, as you said, if he's doing it with Kevin Durant and Chris Paul, he's definitely going to be doing it with Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson. So I don't necessarily see a future there for those two. And I think, politically speaking, you have to start Ayton at the 5. There's no way that he's not starting. Like that would just be a complete nuclear bomb if he wasn't starting at the 5, which means you either shoehorn Rob Will in and do your best, or Rob Will just becomes a 20 to 24 minute a game player, which does feel like a real waste for a player of his potential, where he should be getting this move to a second team to become fully actualized. Instead, if he does have to share the court and the rotation time with Ayton, he's going to be marginalized.
Yeah. Well, I know the Boston Celtics are probably in need of a center, so maybe they can swing a trade there and just get in a real athletic big man. I think with DeAndre Ayton, I think the front office is looking at it and hoping to mold him into a Tyson Chandler, but I'm just scared that DeAndre Ayton is sitting there and thinking, oh, this is my time to become Al Jefferson. Because I think if DeAndre Ayton gets what he wants, it is just to be Big L for that whole entire career. But I think the best part about this from the Blazers is that it's not like they got one of these picks for Damian Lillard and then they rerouted a pick to trade for DeAndre. And I think the excellent thing about this is that it's very low risk. Like they were going to trade or just let Yusuf Nurkic walk whenever he could, which I think he's just about to start a 4 for 100 deal. But they didn't have to. They essentially got an asset in getting off of Yusuf Nurkic and somehow turned it into positive value. Like DeAndre Ayton is about to start or is in his 4 for 120 that the Indiana Pacers signed him to. I think this is just an excellent piece of business from the Blazers, but from the Phoenix Suns point of view, and I'm really interested to see what you think here because we've criticized DeAndre Ayton at every single opportunity, but now he's off your team. The former #1 overall pick is off your team, and you've brought in a guy on the wrong side of 30 in Yusuf Nurkic and a couple of role players and a bad G League player. So you've got Yusuf Nurkic, Grayson Allen, Nasir Little, and Keon Johnson. What are your thoughts as a Phoenix fan for making this move?
So I think it's probably the most pertinent way to analyze it from a Suns perspective is that Nurk is a downgrade on Ayton. I think even the Ayton that we've seen for the last 12 months, he's not a very good defender. He's pretty ground bound, and I don't necessarily think he's an offensive upgrade. I think he offers something different offensively to what Ayton does, which maybe is a plus. But I think Ayton, for all of the flaws that we have just talked about with him, including his inability to finish aggressively at the rim, his inability to ever dunk the ball, he does have a pretty varied and pretty versatile offensive skill set. And I think just overall, he's a better player on both ends than Nurk. So I think it's a little bit surprising that the Suns have identified this guy as the player that we want to come in and be the general of the backline on D, because I think he's not particularly well suited to that. And I mean, the Ayton that we saw 2 years ago would be, the perfect guy for that, or one of the perfect guys for that. So they must just feel that player and that relationship is pretty much unsalvageable. So I think if you look at taking Nurk on and taking whatever downgrade that is from Ayton as the price to bring in Allen and Little, it starts to get a bit interesting because I think Allen is a really good player who just has a skill set that's going to be valuable into the postseason next year, and he's a player who's done it on good teams for the last 3 or 4 years. Like you kind of know what you're getting. He's also a step up from the role players that we were able to bring in on minimums during free agency, and then Nas Little is someone who I've kind of always liked. He's struggled to put it all together in the NBA and has had a few injury disrupted seasons, but he's a really interesting piece. He can kind of play a bit of the 3 and a bit of the 4. And I think with him and then Keita Bates-Diop, we've got some kind of similarly built role guys who can play the 4 and the 5 or the 3 and the 4 and just kind of, I don't know, get a different look around everything. I just think the versatility that the Suns have on the roster now is potentially really difficult to deal with because they've just kind of got okay to good guys at like pretty much every position except point guard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, turns out that might be important, but the other 4 positions, they can throw 2 or 3, either superstars or interesting guys at you. And I think that will be really key, particularly as you head towards the postseason where it might be like, okay, this is a Keita Bates-Diop series, or, like this is a Okogie series or a Watanabe series where one player can kind of just catch fire and supplement the stars really well. So I guess I'm optimistic because I do really like the way that they've been able to buttress their depth and sort of protect against injury and protect against the variability of having a bunch of dudes who aren't necessarily that good on the team. But I am quite surprised that they've said that, like Nurk is the guy that they want to, take over the 5 role from Ayton.
Yeah, they're trading for Nurkic as if he's positive value, which I don't know if he is. He has struggled to stay on the court in the past couple of years, and yes, in the past couple of years, the Portland Trailblazers have been taking down the end. So if Nurkic was slightly injured, he was going to be asked to rest for a lot more of those games. But he's struggled to stay on the court, and I just think on defense, because it's going to matter on defense. Like, yes, you don't have a point guard, but no, you can't run any everything through Nurkic, especially because you've got three ball handlers who want the ball and they deserve the ball. I just don't know what Yusuf Nurkic does on defense, because you're out of your center position. You want someone to plug holes that might be opened up by Devin Booker and Bradley Beal and the rest of your minimum guys. And I just don't think he does it. I think everything that we've made fun of Ayton again at every opportunity, but I just think Nurkic just does it worse, whatever it is. And they've sort of needed to hide. And I talked about playing a zone under Chauncey Billups, and just surrounding Yusuf Nurkic with a bunch of athletic wings like Matisse Thybulle and Jeremy Grant and Cam Reddish. Maybe not that last one, but
Maybe not.
maybe not. But it's just, I think that James, because you've been interested in Nurkic in the past, and you've been interested in Domantas Sabonis in the past, and when James Jones has thrown his hat in the ring for those players, it's always been a bit like, oh, okay, this team isn't fully formed, or maybe it was just after a run, and you're like, oh, what are they doing this for? Is this an agent favor just to say that another team is interested in Domantas Sabonis? Because that was a real thing before he was traded to the Kings, and arguably before the Kings blew them away on that trade offer. And yeah, I just don't agree with James Jones that this is what he needs. Do you feel that as a Suns fan?
Well, I think that the number one thing that Nurk does better than Ayton offensively is he's a better sort of short roll playmaker and like high post facilitator. That's a bit of a Euro big stereotype, but he is actually quite a, dare
It's
I
not
say,
wrong, yeah.
player. And I think that he's definitely better at Ayton in that role. And that does unlock a lot of sort of motion and timing avenues that maybe weren't there necessarily with Ayton, where you can have players just whizzing about. And for an offense that did stagnate at times last season, which again is kind of crazy considering that there's Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant on the floor together, it was kind of stuck in mud at times. So having shooters off the bench and having your stars prepared to move and whiz about would be a really interesting about face with Nurk at the five. But I mean, I guess the skeptic in me would say you don't necessarily need to play that style with someone like that, where the ball is going to be in Nurk's hands and Nurk is going to be finding people and Nurk is going to be making the decisions, because we've got these two ball handlers who are earning 70 million between them. And then we've got fucking Kevin Durant, who, is going to and should have the ball in isolation plenty to be able to run pick and rolls or take people off the dribble. So I wonder if, highlighting Nurk in a way that accentuates his skill set is actually even worthwhile for the offense. And if the answer to that is no, then it doesn't really make much sense at all to have him there. And I think clearly it does make more sense and is more straightforward if there is a rim rolling, defensive minded big there. Not to say that it needs to be, like a Tyson Chandler who can't shoot 4 feet away from the basket. But someone who's at the very least competent and prepared to play that role and just to screen 60 times a game and fill that lane every time they go through, because we really don't need the five to be making plays. We've already got the pieces in place to do that. So I am skeptical of it from that perspective as well. And I mean, you hit on the D, and Nurk is just really not that kind of player, which it's perplexing. I am perplexed, but I am optimistic about bringing in Allen and Little. I think they'll both be good, and I think Allen in particular is going to be a player that's like, oh, awesome. If we just need you to play 28 games in a playoff game, you can just do that, and you're a good enough shooter and a good enough scorer that you're going to give a real punch, and people can't play off you. and you're big enough and competent enough defensively that you won't get played off the court. Like those players are always really valuable come postseason.
That's great. Grayson Allen's sick, but when Yusuf Nurkic is out, behind him you've got Drew Eubanks, Bol Bol, Shimazan Metu, and Udoka Azubuike. It's just interesting, and I can't wait for the season to start. Should we take
Kevin Durant pick and rolls? Let's go.
But Bol Bol's going to be the one taking the shots. Let's take a break and come back and talk about the second half of this trade. And we are back after the second half, and I'd like to apologise for my microphone quality. There are technical difficulties on the Deep to NBA podcast, but something we want to talk about in the second half of this pod are follow-up reports and just sort of timelines that have become more clear after the shocking 4:30 a.m. news that was delivered to Dante's phone between the Bucks and and Damian Lillard. I'll just read them all. Or what's the best way to go about this, D? Should we read them all?
Let's go one by one, I think.
All right, one by one. Now, this isn't all in perfect order, but the first report coming from Shams Charania and Sam Amick of The Athletic is that the Blazers asked for Jimmy Butler or Bam Adebayo to be involved in a potential Lillard trade with the Heat. This, to me, signals that Joe Cronin was just not happy with the hero package whatsoever, and he knows that if he's going to be trading Damian Lillard, it's not going to be for Jimmy Butler or Bam Adebayo. It's going to be for literally anything else on the roster, not called those two. And I think a little theme in these reports that we're hearing, the Athletic reports, you can tell that they're coming through. They're coming with a favorable lens of the Portland Trailblazers, while the Chris Haynes reports, as we know, best friend to Damian Lillard unofficially, are coming from Damian Lillard's party. But what are your thoughts on this? Jimmy or Bam have to be included in the trade report?
I mean, so such an obvious shit post, and I think an indicator that they were so far apart on what Toxic Joe would have deemed an appropriate trade package, that he just felt licensed to take pot shots, because obviously that's never ever going to happen. Those two guys are untouchable, and those two guys are the reason why Dame wants to go there. And Joe kind of been serious when requesting that. So I think he was. It reads to me like he's almost just trying to have a bit of fun with it, knowing that they don't have what it takes to get the trade done, and he's not going to settle for what they can offer.
And then second report coming from Shams Charania and Sam Amick is that Lillard then expanded his list after realizing that a trade wasn't going to happen. And he expanded that list to include the Nets and the Bucks, but resisted the Toronto Raptors. And I couldn't find any other additional information other than a quote resistance to play for the franchise unquote, which. Yeah, I can completely understand. You're on a team in the Portland Trail Blazers that are just treading water, going nowhere. But then you move on to a team in the Toronto Raptors who appear to be treading water and going nowhere. And it's just, if you're Damian Lillard, that's just not as sexy as going to almost any other team. But I think it's just such a bummer for the Toronto Raptors, who during all those deep conference finals runs where they just got owned by LeBron year after year after year, and then obviously going on to win a title, beating the Warriors in 2019. It just seems like such a step back from a PR standpoint that Masai Ujiri seemed to have done in his time with the Toronto Raptors, just making them a respectable organization and a place that people want to go. Dame is just, maybe he's an old head superstar who just says, no, I don't want to play outside of America. But a bit of a bummer there. What are your thoughts on that report?
I think I don't necessarily think that the Raptors with Dame would have been treading water. I think they actually would have become a very interesting team all of a sudden. But I think, if there is anything more to this than just what, like what you've mentioned about some aversion to going north of the border, from a basketball perspective, you can make a pretty good case not to want to be involved with the Raptors right now. What with Anunoby being an expiring and there being no real contract talks between them is what's been reported. And then depending on your perspective, either Siakam wanting out or the Raptors wanting to move Siakam ahead of his impending free agency, both of those guys would be awesome fits with Dame, but the risk of one or neither of them being there means that if you're Dame, you couldn't be confident whatsoever that this would have even a playoff nucleus moving forward. And wouldn't that just be the worst, where you have spent your whole career in Portland in the last few years, have gone a certain way, and then you not only miss the opportunity to take a step forward, but you actually end up taking a step back. Like Dame's probably looked into the crystal ball and seen him playing with Scotty Barnes next season and said, no, thank
Especially if you have the choice between Giannis and Scotty Barnes. And then on to the Chris Haynes from Bleacher Report reports. After no Miami trade was imminent, Damian Lillard, now this is very much revisionist history by Lillard, but Damian Lillard asked to rescind his trade request and the Blazers front office denied it. Joe Cronin said that there is no way that they can turn back now after it has been done. And Damian Lillard said that he was, quote, shocked, unquote, when Cronin told him that. This is just insane. This is just the Damian Lillard media powerhouse. I think they're almost a PR agency at this point. It's just incredible that he wants to control the narrative this much, and I can completely understand through all the years of wanting to be loyal and wanting to be that guy and the person who stays as opposed to everyone else who leaves. But this is like, it's happened. We know how it happened. Obviously, Miami Miami just didn't have what it took to get a deal done. I think that's very clear, and I think there might have been multiple teams with the better offer. But just we don't need any more of this Portland love. And there was obviously a lot of tweets and a lot of reports coming out, and James says that he loves the city of Portland, etc. But it's just, can we move on? Damian Lillard's getting his final little pot shot, and I imagine you felt the same. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen something so. I mean, I have, but I've almost never seen something so blatant.
Mm.
There's very little veneer here. It's quite apparent that he is just trying to do some image management for the city of Portland, so that he can sort of maintain, like, oh, I never wanted to go, like I actually wanted to come back, like I love the city, but in the end I had to go. They wouldn't let me come back. It's like, bro, you scored 20,000 points in Portland. They love you. They understand. You have requested a trade away from the city. You requested a trade from Portland to Miami, which are two polar opposite markets and cities in terms of vibe. I think the people who are going to be upset at you for leaving are going to be upset at you for leaving. And the people who understand and are prepared to forgive and hit you with some amazing gratitude for a great 11 years are the people who are already going to do that. So why are you trying to manipulate the image that you leave after you've already done such a sterling job of making sure that your image is intact in the city? Just feels unnecessary. It just feels like unnecessary icing on the cake.
He felt that it was necessary. And then final piece of news, again coming from Chris Haynes, is that the NBA League office intervened on the 23rd of September and made sure that all parties were cooperating. They actually hosted a Zoom call between Dame, his agent, Portland Trail Blazers, and several people in the Portland Trail Blazers, just to say, hey, we don't want this leaking into the season. We know that there's teams out there not named Miami who are ready to trade for Damian Lillard, and they just want it done. And they could see Lillard and his pride and his all these PR guys not wanting to be the ones to push and maybe find a secondary team. I actually think this is quite well done by Adam Silver by essentially saying what we've all been saying for years, which is just shut up and get it done. We don't need to hear about any more of this Damian Lillard honor stuff. If he's the one, it's not the league that said you have to be traded. He's the one who said, I will be traded. He's been traded. It's done, and I'm happy that Adam Silver stepped in here. Do you feel the same, or is this maybe a little bit too much interference from a front office, or from a league front office?
Do you think that shut up and get it done is the front office equivalent of shut up and dribble?
Shut up and dribble in a different jersey.
Yeah. Shut up and get it done. No, I pretty much echo everything that you've said there. I think it's sometimes a fine line, but in this instance, it was unproductive, not to mention extremely fucking tedious that things had dragged on and seems to be at an impasse. But should we jump into the Jrue Holiday trade and bring in the Boston Celtics side of things?
So
So
you go.
they have traded Rob Will, Brogdon, and two firsts, one of them their own and one of them this year's Golden State pick for Drew. And they now essentially have 7 guys on the roster.
Mm.
Some of those guys are pretty good, though.
Yeah, I heard Nate Duncan and Danny LaRue just go through the pure talent of the team and just say, hey, like, look, from 1 to 7, this might be the most talented team in the league. But I just don't know. Like, we're still yet to see Kristaps Porzingis play for the Boston Celtics, and I wonder how he fits, and I wonder how he's going to look outside of the first half of that Washington Wizards season, which. Look, it's great. Porzingis played well in a Washington Wizards jersey, and that's awesome. But it's also the first time we've seen him play like consistently well since he was a Knick, really. Like since the season before he got majorly injured with the New York Knicks, which like that's great that he's back to where he was. But let's just wait and see it a little bit more. And teams are always talking about what happens if every single player becomes available. But Drew Holiday looks like a guy who was actually going to retire with the Milwaukee Bucks, and that was a quote that he had actually said a week before his trade. But Drew Holiday was one of those guys who just fit so perfectly next to Giannis and next to Brook Lopez. They'd obviously invested a lot in him by trading, everything that they possibly could to get him. But for the Boston Celtics, to me, it seems a little bit like, oh, we can get this guy, let's get it. It wasn't part of a grand plan. And I know Brad Stevens had a quote just after the offseason, after the main meet of the offseason, where he said, oh, we're amassing picks, we've got something bigger. I don't think that Brad Stevens was sitting there going, oh yeah, eventually Damian Lillard is just going to get traded to the Milwaukee Bucks, and we're going to be able to get one of the best two-way point guards in the whole entire league. Like that couldn't have been written on a whiteboard anywhere. So this seems opportunistic, but saying all that negative stuff, I think it is an excellent opportunity, and I think the Portland Trailblazers have just gotten what I think is a hole for a 33-year-old, but the Boston Celtics have just brought in one of the best two-way guards in the whole entire NBA, a guy who, unlike Marcus Smart, he's not going to come in there and look at the Jays and go, why the fuck aren't you shooting in the playoffs? And then just throw up shots. He might actually be on the other end of the spectrum where he's not going to shoot enough. But I think that's a good problem because what the Boston Celtics need is the guys whose name starts with J to shoot more shots. And I think Drew Holiday does that perfectly. And I think he's a great table setter for their superstars. But he's also, one of the most versatile defenders that we've ever seen. So I think great piece of business by the Boston Celtics. I just don't know about giving up Robert Williams. What do you think?
Are you including JD Davidson and Jay Scrub in there?
I knew you were going to look it up. Obviously, I'm not going to include JD Davidson. He's just, I just don't think he has that it factor. At 6'3", only 1 year in the league, he's just proven that he can't be that guy. Jay Scrub, I will wait. and see what happens. But look, he's spent 3 years in the league already. He should know what he's doing. I'm definitely including Jay Scrub. If the first sound out of your mouth is Jay, I think you're definitely going to be able to take some shots.
I just want to applaud your commitment to the bit. That was above and beyond.
Thanks. It felt a bit, 9 p.m. on a Monday down the end there, but thanks for the applause. But Boston Celtics have Drew Holiday.
I always got your back. I think the number one thing that I've taken away from this is fuck Porzingis better work out. Because if it doesn't, you're semi-screwed. Because Porzingis' backup or front court partner, depending on how you want to slice the pie, is a 37-year-old Al Horford. So declining play, injury, lack of availability. I mean, there's a lot that could limit Horford from being a consistently effective player this season. And, you've kind of outlined his sister. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, his sister could limit a lot of effectiveness. Shout out to Anna Horford. That's some real deep two lore. Yeah, bloody hell. Anna Horford, one of a kind. But you've kind of touched on Porzingis's, inconsistency, I guess. The Dallas years weren't particularly good, and his before last season, you're right in saying that there had been 3 or 4 years before he had been really actually, dominant in that All-Star season in New York. I mean, the health as well. Like if Porzingis, if he carries this injury that he's got with him currently into the season, or if he just picks up a foot injury that keeps him out 20 games, like this team is not only thin, but they're just going to have no quality big men because their best reserves, are Derek White, and Al Horford. We've already talked about Horford. Then, your next best is Peyton Pritchard, and Derek White's a great defender. We'll see what Peyton Pritchard can do in a bigger role, but there's sort of no big or wing depth on this team at all. And those are, going out on a limb and say those are quite important. And unlike the Suns taking a stars and scrubs approach into the off season, at least, obviously they've bolstered their depth with some reserves that we've touched on, but there's no one really on the back end of this Celtics roster who you're like, oh yeah, like this person could definitely thrive in a bigger role, or this random wing could come in and average 12 and shoot 40%. Like there's no one really like Svi Mikhailuk. Is he gonna step into a role on a good team? Like probably not. I mean, someone like Delano Banton has gone around with the Raptors for a few seasons and was really effective for the Raptors in their G League with the Raptors 905. But I mean, you're really taking long shots with those two names, and they're kind of like the guys that are sticking out to me the most. So
for what it's worth, I like Lamar Stevens, but no, he's not gonna fill any hole other than energy big man who's too small.
Yeah. I mean, if your 11th man is your 7th man, you're in trouble, generally speaking.
And also Peyton Pritchard, Peyton Pritchard's apparently supposed to be really good, and whenever he touches the court, he's great. But it's sort of been like, he's been hidden for 2 years. And everyone's just like, I mean, John Hollinger loves talking about Peyton Pritchard, saying like at the trade deadline, I think 2 years in a row, he said, someone please try and trade for this guy, like get him off this team. He could be a great rotation guard because now looking at his height, he is 6'1". I thought he was taller than that. But, people have been saying, oh, Peyton Pritchard's good. And now it's like,
he's outlasted everyone.
Yeah, he has outlasted everyone not called Jay, but he better be good, because it's like if he's Landry Shamet, it's like, okay, well that's not a very effective player. But if he's able to be that, let's call it a very poor man's Derek White, or maybe just a poor man's Derek White, that's really good, and that's what everyone has been saying that he is. But now it's sort of like you actually have to prove it now, and now there's a lot of question marks on this team. Where Al Horford's 37, Kristaps Porzingis has had 2/3 of a good season. Peyton Pritchard hasn't had 2/3 of a good season, but apparently he's good. Everyone else is proven, but yeah, there's 4 dudes. And let's just sort of see what happens.
I mean, considering that the Jays are going to handle the ball quite a lot, and Holiday is a really awesome complementary ball handler, Derek White is clearly the best player off the bench, another combo guard. Would Pritchard be someone that they might look at flipping in just like a 1-for-1 or a 1-for-2, like trade him for some wing depth, or trade him for a wing and a big or something like that? Because whilst he is supposed to be good and you'd love to get like a Tyus Jones type bump out of him, like that would be awesome. There is a bit of positional redundancy with him being so small, and his greatest skills being things that are replicated elsewhere on the roster, and quite obvious glaring holes elsewhere. So I wonder if a couple weeks, really after December 15, when most players around the league will start to become trade eligible, if they might look to flip him and try and bring someone bigger in.
Yeah, I mean, they also still have access to, I think, 2 first-round picks that they can move, and that's not including swaps. So maybe it's Pritchard plus salary, which there isn't actually much salary floating around that they can move, and those picks. Yeah, I don't know what that gets you. We'll have to wait and see. And if you're trading picks for role players, then it's like, oh, okay, well, what about everyone else who just finds role players in free agency either through the season or otherwise? I've spoken to a few people today. I've listened to a few podcasts. A lot of people are like, that's it. Boston Celtics are, title favorites. They should do it. But I prefer the Milwaukee Bucks, and I don't think it's close at all. Do you agree with that?
I prefer the Bucks, but I do think it's close. I do think that's a conversation, definitely. I think it's maybe closer than what you're intimating.
Okay. I think I would say, let me just quickly get the conference up. I would say my tier one might just, in the Eastern Conference, might just be the Milwaukee Bucks. And then my tier two would be, Cleveland, Philly, Boston, and Cleveland's a question mark there. I think they are definitely a tier above. And we'll have to wait and see once they roll the ball out there. But I'm not as high on this as which it's I might be digging myself a hole because I'm not as high as one of the best young teams adding one of the best role players in the NBA, in Drew Holiday, but I'm just not as high as others are in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this team's definitely better than Philly. I mean, to sit here in the off season and project, I think they're definitely better than Philly. Not even withstanding the roster flux, the flux at the top of the depth chart that Philly is currently experiencing, not to mention the chemistry issues that Philly is currently experiencing. So I think this team is definitely in tier above Philly, but I'd probably take them against Cleveland. I mean, I think like the Jays have mostly been actually quite healthy through their respective careers, and Holiday has been mostly healthy over the course of a long career as well. And that's a pretty mint addition to this team. Someone who essentially just defensively, you can just plug him into the Marcus Smart role, only he's way, way better offensively. And I do think that, we kind of talked about it when the Porzingis trade had just happened. And, I mentioned it then, and I still feel it now that KP really increases their ceiling. This team has the opportunity to be better than what they were previously by adding KP.
And I think bringing in a seamless combo guard definitely helps that. It doesn't limit their ceiling by having Drew Holiday on the team.
No, not at all. And I mean, like, he's a very similar player to Marcus Smart, only he's just way more offensively polished. He's not quite the defender he is, particularly not at this point in his career, but he is just a seamless piece who's going to replace a guy that they, really would have missed. So I think the ceiling on this team is way higher than what it was previously, if things go according to plan, which is, with Porzingis in particular, a big if. But if I can ask you this, the Celtics have turned Smart, Brogdon, Rob Will, and Picks into Holiday and KP.
I would like to add Grant Williams into that because they let him walk to also facilitate some of these deals.
That's true. So throw Grant Williams in there. I think if you can do that, you've got to do it, right?
What? Smart, Brogdon, Williams for Holiday and KP?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
You do.
Yeah, this team lost to the Miami Heat, who were levels away from the Denver Nuggets. The Miami Heat have also been a little bit of a boon for the Boston Celtics in recent playoff history. I don't think that's good value. I don't think Smart, Brogdon, Williams, and Picks into Drew Holiday and KP, I was going to say Kevin Peterson, is good business. So no, to answer your question, do you think it is?
I do think this because they were sitting on a surplus of picks, and the picks that they've given up primarily aren't actually super high value in the immediate, in the short or medium term. And they still, as you've mentioned, have access to 2 first-round picks plus swaps. So they haven't really handicapped themselves at all. And I think they probably rightly surmised that they could use an injection of something different, because this team has been together for a few years, but hasn't necessarily looked like necessarily taking that next step, or becoming like a no doubt about it. This team has what it takes to get it done. And Smart sneakily getting older. Brogdon, his injury concerns were.
Can we call him Broggers?
Pardon?
Can we call him Broggers?
Broggers. His injury report was reportedly a big part of
Yeah,
the
why he
reason
was
why the
cheap.
Celtics wanted to get rid of him and why he didn't end up on the Clippers. So you're looking at kind of two older guards, a position that you're, looking okay for your reserves with White and Pritchard, and just condensing that into one player who's better and more versatile than either of them. And
Mm,
then I guess the same thing again with the Williams twins. I mean, KP is the best player out of any of those two by quite some margin. And again, like Grant Williams is a nice player, but
mm,
someone like Grant Williams can't be the reason why you're not doing something to bring in, like a super high ceiling player.
mm. Okay.
So I don't know. I think it'd be interesting to see what this team does, maybe with Pritchard looking to bring in a different sort of player, and then
Yeah.
whether they look to use their first round picks to bring in some more reserves, or whether they try and hold the powder dry. But I think, crossing fingers and wishing good health for this team, I think this team is gonna be in a really good position to make a lot of noise come postseason.
Mm. Look, let's just wait until the balls roll out. I respectfully disagree.
Well, part of what we do here is just prognosticate. So, waiting until the balls roll out isn't always the most conducive for prognostication.
Dante, beautiful chat, beautiful short notice chat, and I will speak to you next time.
Thanks so much, Sean. This was lovely.